The edit window, much like the mix window, gives us an overview of our tracks. The difference here is that this is where we do all our editing. We can now see the tracks just like we saw in the mix window, but this time they're laid out horizontally. Let's take a quick look along this top toolbar first. Starting at the top left, we have Shuffle, Spot, Slip, and Grid. These are the different editing modes, and we'll talk about these later on. Just to the right of that, we have our zooming options. Just quickly, these left and right arrows allow us to zoom in and out. Once again, we'll go in more detail later on. Next, we have all of our tools. The most important one is definitely going to be the Smart tool, which you can click on by clicking this little border right here. Check out the chapter on the tools for more on how to use them. Further to the right here, we got our main time window. We can click here to change how it's displayed. I like leaving it set to bars and beats. We can also enable a sub counter down here if we want to, and set that one to something else. Now we're displaying two different types of time measurement at the same time. Watch them change as I play back. Pretty cool. Here we can also view the start, end, and length of our selection. Again, we'll get into selection later on. This window also gives us information about our cursor position. This is really handy when you're doing precise editing. Over here, we can enable and disable the grid and mess around with the nudge values. We've also got this extra little transport over here, which I love because sometimes I don't like having that big transport down here getting in the way. I got all the controls I need right here. We can decide what we want to show or hide by clicking on this arrow here and selecting or deselecting things. You can see there's a couple options here that I'm not showing, but we don't need to worry about those right now. Right below this top section, we have something called the universe. This gives us an overview of the entire Pro Tools session. This little white rectangle here shows us what we have in view down here. Let's use these plus and minus buttons here. You can see that little white box changing. We can quickly move around the session by clicking on the rectangle and dragging it around. Very cool. On the left side of the window here, we have the same Show Hide Tracks and Group List windows that we had in the Mix window. Next, we have our rulers. Rulers are a huge help when it comes to editing, as you'll see in later chapters. Clicking here, we can show and hide the various rulers. Below that, we have our tracks and all the different track elements. Once again, we can click here and show and hide different things. We can change the size of our tracks by clicking on these little arrows here and selecting an option. We can also right-click just on the right edge here. Look at that. To change all the tracks at the same time, just hold Option while you're selecting it. Brilliant. Over on the right here, we have our regions list. Whenever we record audio or MIDI or import any audio or MIDI, we'll see those items here in the regions list. We can hide this list by clicking on the arrow here. And we can also hide the windows over here, like that. We can bring up an editor by clicking on this arrow here. Once again, we'll get more into that later on. Well, that gives you a quick overview. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty and start doing some stuff in Pro Tools.